You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. My name's Trish Roberts. So I wanted to talk about veganism today in relation to the environment. We hear arguments that it's a good idea to promote veganism for environmental reasons because that's more likely to get people to go vegan. Firstly, I just want to talk about what veganism is. Veganism rejects using animals for food. That's meat, dairy, eggs, honey, for clothing, wool, silk, fur, leather, and other reasons, entertainment, labor, and the like. And that includes rejecting the idea that there are humane ways to use animals. And I'll get into that in another video. That's a topic in itself. But vegans reject the idea of happy animals in farms and the idea that it's morally acceptable to use animals, even if they were raised in the most quote end quote humane way. So vegans reject that. So, well, the ones I know anyway, abolitionist vegans reject that. There's a lot of people who actually, say they're vegan and yet they promote happy animal slavery. But as I say, that's a topic for another time. So, so that's what veganism is. It's an ethical position, just as it's an ethical position to reject if we reject, say, racist behavior and racism. If we reject racism, then we wholeheartedly reject it. We don't engage in it every so often and think that that's okay and sort of say, well, I only do it on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. I only engage in racist slurs and racist behavior and whatever, and then the rest of the week I don't. We wholeheartedly reject that, hopefully. That's being morally consistent. So veganism is an ethical position, not unlike those other positions where we otherize sentient beings. With racism, we otherize human beings because they belong to a particular group. With heterosexism, we otherize people that don't belong to a particular group. With ableism, we otherize people because they might have different abilities to us, and so on. And sexism, we otherize women because we don't think they're equal to us, and that has many, many repercussions, of course. Sexism is alive and well in society, just as racism is alive and well. And so even though these various forms of otherization and discrimination, which cause great violence, by the way, even though they exist, we still reject them in society as something that is not okay. It's not morally okay to engage in them. That's what we say. Of course, we engage in it all the time, and our governments do as well. But we say that we reject those positions. And so with veganism, which rejects speciesism, which rejects the property status of non-human animals, if we say we are vegan, then we must reject that, and that means including the idea that it's morally acceptable to exploit animals in a quote-unquote humane way, because that doesn't exist. And even if it did exist, it would still be wrong. And like I say, I will address that in another video, and I've done that in my podcast and on my vegan resource, howtogovegan.org. I talk about the word humane and how it is very misleading. So I'll leave a link to that in the information section of this video. It's called Humane, What's in a Word, and it's I think it covers the issue pretty well. So excuse me, it's getting a bit. So that's what veganism is. It's a rejection of the property status of animals. It's a rejection of using these sentient beings, and they are sentient. I mean, there's no doubt. You know, even fish are sentient. Okay, people can argue that they're not sentient, but it's very apparent that they are. So vegans reject using sentient beings as resources. So that's the first thing. Now, so if it's an ethical position, then when we say, well, let's promote veganism for environmental reasons, I could liken that to, say, rejecting bombing human beings in, say, different countries because we're using depleted uranium bombs. That just wouldn't, that would seem very odd to, say, reject bombing Muslims in 7 Muslim majority countries, as we're doing now, because we're using uranium depleted bombs, and that's destroying the environment. And so that's the sort of the short comparison to what's wrong with promoting veganism for environmental reasons. Of course, there are tremendous effects, a catastrophic effect of animal agriculture on the environment. And I'll leave a link to an essay by Chris Hedges called Apocalyptic Capitalism, which focuses on the second page of this essay in TruthDig. It focuses on the animal agriculture and the 51% of greenhouse gases that animal agriculture produces, and also about the fact that there's so many different things that it does to the environment. But just even this one point about 1 acre every minute of Amazon rainforest is cleared for animal agriculture and for soy production to feed animals in animal agriculture. So, I mean, that's tremendous. That's just one thing, and there are dozens of things, dozens of problems with animal agriculture, just talking about it in the environmental sense. Of course, animal agriculture is appalling, and that includes the so-called grass-fed cows. If you read in gentleworld.org, and I'll leave a link to that, it talks about how grass-fed cows are the grazing of them is worse in some ways than the so-called quote-unquote factory farming of cows, the very large, cow farms they have, say, in California. So I invite you to check that out, and I'll leave a link to that. So there are many, many problems with animal agriculture in relation to the environment. And anybody who's actually into accepting fact and not being a climate denier would really have a hard time disagreeing with that. Anybody who disagrees with that is not really looking at the science and is just trying to, find excuses. So let's say, for sake of argument, okay, so animal agriculture is destroying the environment and causing 51% of greenhouse gases, and we can quibble about the percentage, but it's tremendously damaging. And also, fishing in the oceans is absolutely destroying the oceans as well. And it's also going to eventually empty the oceans, where there will be no sea life in there at all. So we're destroying the aquatic animals' homes, and eventually, of course, we're driving ourselves, human beings, into extinction and taking everybody else with us, all the other species. So that's something that we need to consider. That first of all, it exists. Animal agriculture is destroying the environment, and should we promote veganism for environmental reasons because of that? Well, we can mention it, but like I say, veganism is an ethical position. It's not a diet. It's not a diet rejecting meat. It's not just a diet rejecting animal products, which it is. It rejects eating animal products. It is a diet that rejects using sentient beings, and they are sentient, as resources, as property. Just like just like it's not okay to vilify and objectify women because they happen to be a different gender. That is an irrelevant criterion, gender, and species is an irrelevant criterion. We all belong to the moral community because we're sentient and because we are earthlings on this earth, where we live on this earth. And our species doesn't own those other sentient beings who happen to be another species. And it doesn't matter that they have different cognitive abilities to us. That doesn't matter at all, because they can do a lot of things that we can't do. A lot of things. Does that make us lesser? No, it just makes us different. Unfortunately, human beings have this problem where we see difference as something to be afraid of and as something to want to stamp out. And we do it within our own species. This is not just something we do to other animals, non-human animals. We do it to our own species. We try and stamp out anything that is different to us. Anything that is different to us, and that's because we. I don't know why we do that, but it's causing lots and lots of violence in the world today, and it's really going to be our downfall, because we probably might end up blowing ourselves up in some nuclear apocalypse or whatever. But we're also torturing and killing 1 trillion aquatic and land animals every year, because we have decided that because they are a different species to us, that makes them lesser, and because we can get away with exploiting and killing them, we will. That's a terrible excuse, really, to exploit other animals because we can. But then it's awful what we're doing to Muslims in Muslim majority countries, where we're bombing them, 3 bombs every hour of every day during the Obama administration for 8 years. We did that, and there was hardly a peep from anybody. There was no anti-war demonstration about it, really. To think of, there was probably maybe 1 or 2 or 3. There's certain groups that certainly work on that all the time, but there is billions of people on the planet, and there was, if everybody spoke out against this, it would probably end. So there's a level of racism there, and a level of otherization of a group based on either their religion or the fact that they look Arab, because, people are being killed because they look Arab, not because they're Muslim. It's a sort of a racist thing. People are being pushed into subways and killed because they look Arab, and it turns out they were Indian or something like that. This is what otherization and discrimination does. It allows us to objectify a particular group and torture and kill them, and we've been doing that. And this is why, and this is what we've been doing to non-human animals for thousands of years. We've decided that because they are a different species, they are lesser, and we have objectified them and otherized them to the point where we just consider them resources. But we've done this to humans all throughout history too. We've had human slaves where we've otherized them to the point where we think it's totally fine for us to use them as property and even kill them when they're of no use. So this is something we've done to our own species, and we've done it over thousands of years. Even indigenous people, when they've had wars with other tribes, have taken those people from the losing side and turned them into slaves. So it's something widespread. All of us, all different groups in some way have done this, even indigenous groups. So that's something that we unfortunately seem to do as a species. And the one discrimination which is really not addressed at all on our planet, and which is the greatest discrimination of all, that is causing the most violence. I mean, we torture and kill more animals in 4 days than all the humans that we've killed in wars and genocides, and that have died in plagues and who have been murdered, etc. We kill more non-human animals, and they're sentient beings who love life just like we do. They don't want to die. They have different likes and dislikes. They love their young. They interact with the world. We kill more of these individuals in 4 days than all those humans. And those individuals are equally morally important. We just don't recognize it because we've otherized them to the point where we just see them as things, as resources. We really do. And yet, we might live with a cat or a dog, and mind you, a cat and dog in society, because they're non-human animals, are viewed as property. They're viewed as property, and people kill them all the time. They die. They are killed in shelters by the millions every year. But we live with dogs and cats because we've fetishize them in a way, more so than other animals. We fetishize them and we breed them into existence, and we have them in our homes. And yet a lot of us see these individuals as family members. And we love them just like we do any human family member. In fact, many people I know, when their dog or cat dies, they're absolutely destroyed for a long time. They're grief-stricken, just like, even sometimes more so than when a human friend dies. And before I became vegan, I was like that. I was the same. A cat that I adopted. She lived till she was 16 years old, and when it came time where she was too sick and she had cancer and she was suffering, and I took her along to the vet to be euthanized, I was absolutely distraught and cried, and it was just, I can't remember being that distraught and so grief-stricken and so devastated by the loss of her. So, but this is before becoming vegan, and I didn't realize that my relationship with Isis was in some ways, I had a personal relationship with her, but all the animals that I was eating and wearing and etc., they all had a love of life just like Isis. They loved life, they interacted with the world. The thing is, I didn't have a personal relationship with them, so the animals that were on my plates, the secretions of animals that I might have been drinking, like the dairy or the yogurt or whatever, from animals that had been eventually killed or their young had been taken from them, which happens in the dairy industry. And I'll put a link to the absolute the violence that's in the dairy industry, and I'm going to post an article that includes a description of organic milk and what happens to the calves and to the mothers even in the so-called organic dairy industry. I'll put that in the information section, and I invite you to check it out. And I might, if I have enough time, I'll read some of that. So that will give you an idea of that how important it is to be vegan. That there is so much violence in all kinds of animal use, even the ones that we think are the nice ways to treat animals. Okay, so but back to my cat, the cat that I live with. I didn't see, because I've been heavily indoctrinated to be the speciesism is pervasive and it's unrelenting. I didn't see that the animals that are on my plate or the ones that I was wearing on my feet and back, the wool, the leather, etc., the silk, I didn't see that they are also sentient beings just like Isis is. Because I didn't have a personal relationship with them, but so what? I didn't have a personal relationship with them, but that doesn't mean that they aren't that way. They aren't sentient, and it doesn't mean they don't love life as much as my cat Isis did. And if I got to know any of those animals, I probably would develop a relationship with them. But even if I didn't, so what? They're sentient beings. Their life and their importance shouldn't rely on me and how I feel about it, or us as a species and how we feel about it. It doesn't matter if they don't show emotion that we can see anyway, like fish. I mean, we don't know what's going on really with fish. They have interactions with others, and there's a lot of things that fish do that we don't know about, but they are sentient. And I mean, why are we killing so many sentient beings when we don't have to? We don't have to do that. We don't need animal products to survive at all. Read the China study. Watch the documentary, What the Health. I haven't seen it, but I've heard it's very good, What the Health. And get a hold of a copy of How Not to Die by Michael Greger. I'll put these in the links in the information section. But we don't need animal products to survive at all. In fact, they're killing us in the amounts we eat them. So we're only doing all of this. We're only participating, one, in the destruction of sentient beings, the wholesale killing 1 trillion aquatic and land animals every year. And we're killing ourselves because most of the diseases and illnesses we get these days are from animal products, from the consumption of animal products in the amounts that we eat them, is killing us. And then we have the catastrophic destruction and contribution to climate change due to animal agriculture and fishing, etc. So there are so many things that are absolutely disastrous and unethical. And we're also contributing to world hunger because a lot of poorer countries are producing grain to feed to animals overseas, and they're sort of starving in their own country, or if they're not starving, they're very, very poor. So the amounts of grain, it takes a huge amount of grain to make 1 pound of beef. Like, I think it's 7 pounds of grain or something like that to make 1 pound of beef. Fish are being fed to cows. Huge amounts of fish now are being fed to cows in those large industrialized farms. Euthanized animals are being fed to cows. Feathers are being fed to cows. Fish are being fed to fish. The aquaculture, the so-called sustainable aquaculture, which is just horrific. They jam all those sentient fish into these caged areas until they start dying, and then they call that animal welfare. Once they've got it to a situation where they're not dying, but they're sick and they're getting all sorts of illnesses too, once they get, they jam them in until they start dying, and then they call that welfare. It's horrific, and this is where we're going. This is what we've done as a species, and even when we were people like to use the argument, well, when we were cave people, you know, we used to be hunters and whatever. You know, if you read recent reports, the Neanderthals were actually mostly vegetarian. There's a recent report that they've discovered that they are, I think, mostly vegetarian. So it's sort of, and even if they weren't though, we don't, even if our ancestors weren't, and even if they were going around just eating meat all the time, right, and killing, we don't need to do that now. You know, we have even people that are living in remote areas. Even Inuits can get supplies of food dropped to them. You know, Inuits living in remote areas. This whole, you know, I often hear that excuse, oh, well, what about the Inuits and what about, you know, caveman and all these various different excuses. Well, firstly, I often say, are you an Inuit? Are you a cave person? But then I explain that most people on the planet can get food, you know, have the ability to get food these days. Most people are not remote. You and I are not living in remote areas either. So I don't know why people reach for that reason, but oftentimes when somebody's resistant, they'll go from one poor excuse to another, to another, to another, thinking that, well, for one, thinking I'm going to give up and go, well, all right. No, I can't really let people get away with those weak excuses because, like, lives depend on it. Lives depend on this message being clear to people. And that's why it's important for people to grasp the ethical position, because that's what veganism is. It's not about human-centric reasons that are all about us once again, because that's what's caused this problem in the first place, being all about us. Everything is about humans. People think that we're the only planet that has life on it. You know, they act as if that's the case. People think that this whole world is here for us. We can do whatever the hell we want with it, and who gives a toss about non-human animals? We're a small, less than 1% of the species on the planet, and yet we treat this planet as if it's our planet, and these sentient beings are irrelevant. We're driving them out of their habitats, clearing their habitats, making them extinct at 200 a day, species a day, and a lot of that is a result of animal agriculture and just unfettered capitalism and greed and speciesism. I mean, we are probably, as a species, going to go extinct in 20 to 30 years. And in some ways, that's probably not something we can turn around. But we can. We don't have to wait, though, for corporations, and we don't have to wait for green groups to stop omission by deception and not mentioning about animal agriculture. We don't have to wait for these bloated organizations to get round to admitting that animal agriculture is a tremendous driver in climate change. We can do something right now to address that. We can go vegan, but go vegan for the right reasons. And I say the right reasons because, just like I gave the example of Muslims being bombed in countries that we shouldn't advocate that we shouldn't bomb them because depleted uranium that is used in those bombs is destroying the environment. We should be advocating an anti-war position that it is wrong to otherize a group and then to be killing them, particularly for any reason, but particularly because it's often just for resources and hegemony. So if we hopefully wouldn't be advocating to stop bombing, and killing 1 million Iraqis, that we shouldn't have done that because the uranium that we used in those bombs has sullied the environment. If we wouldn't be doing that, and hopefully we wouldn't, then we shouldn't be advocating veganism, which is an ethical position, making it into something that is all about us again, which is the environment. Because just say, for sake of argument, something happened where we could completely turn around climate change. Say they invented some thousands of instruments that could remove the carbon from the air and remove methane and all of this, and just say we could turn this around, or just say, for sake of argument, something crazy like we stopped emitting. Corporations decided to do the right thing and stop emitting all these toxins and stuff into the environment, and also just say animal agriculture vanished. Just say all of that happened. Then people who went vegan for environmental reasons, and I say vegan because that's not really going vegan, that's becoming a plant-based dieter. Okay, so say if people went vegan, became a plant-based dieter for the environment, and then something happened and that was all fixed up, and there was no more problem with climate change and greenhouse gases. Well, they just say, okay, well, I don't need to be quote unquote vegan anymore. See what I'm saying about how problematic that is? And the same for going vegan in quotes for health reasons. There are thousands and thousands of videos and people online using the word vegan and using it incorrectly, and saying, and when you click on their videos, they're doing videos about food. Now, videos about how to eat a plant-based diet and what to eat, and it's delicious, by the way. There's nothing boring about it. People seem to have this idea that it's like steamed veggies or something, or that it's incredibly boring. It's eating salads. It's not. It's delicious. I mean, just look at there's literally tens of thousands of fantastic recipes online that are of all kinds of different cuisines, and it's absolutely, I don't feel I'm missing out on anything. In fact, I often say to friends, God, I'm so glad I'm vegan. I'm just so happy to be vegan. There's no sacrifice in it. And the food is delicious. And of course, just remembering, though, that veganism is more than a diet. It rejects using animals for food, clothing, entertainment, and other reasons. But just talking about the diet thing itself, not only is it delicious, but it's incredibly healthy. And I've never been healthier in my life. And if you look at nutritionfacts.org, and I'll put a link to that, that's just about a plant-based diet. It's not a vegan site. It's about plant-based diets and the science that backs information about a plant-based diet, as well as looking at what animal products do to our bodies. And I'll put a link to that. It's very clear that animal products do not belong in our bodies, particularly in the amounts we eat them. But even sometimes, even if we eat small amounts of them, they also affect us. And I invite you to check out that site, because it's really, really informative. Even though I've been vegan for 12 years now, I still learn stuff about the amazing things about a plant-based diet, and also about the problems with animal products on our bodies, etc. So I invite you to check that out. But if we only focus on health, and we're talking about veganism, and I put that in quotes because talking about health and veganism it's not veganism. But if we only talk about health in relation to veganism, then of course when it becomes inconvenient, people will just go, oh well, I'm going out with my friends tonight, a few little prawns or some fish sauce or whatever. That's nothing. I mean, a little bit of egg in this or whatever. I can cheat. The word cheat. When you recognize that those animals and their secretions, that violence and death followed, that was the result of great violence and death, and they are sentient beings. When you really internalize that, there's no going back on that. Once you've internalized the ethical position, there's no going back. It's sort of like, it's like when you can't unring that bell in a way. So when people say they used to be vegan and now they're not vegan, they're an ex-vegan, you see little blogs of people that are going on about, oh my God, my health was suffering, and oh, it was so hard. Nonsense. You know, if you've internalized the ethical position, just like any other ethical position, if you realize that racism is wrong, or heterosexism and homophobia and transphobia are wrong, if you realize that ableism is wrong, if you realize that sexism is wrong, then it's something that inside you know it's not okay, and you try and avoid it wherever possible. You try and avoid it, full stop. That's what ethical positions are. They're morally consistent positions. They're not picking and choosing. I'll be sexist this day, but these other days I won't be, or I'll pick and choose when I'm sexist. You know, if I'm with my friends, I'll be sexist because no one can see me, and then I'm outside in public and I want to put on a good face, so I'll not be sexist. I mean, politicians do this kind of thing all the time. They say one thing and do another. There's nothing ethical in that. There's nothing ethical in us, you know, sort of doing the meat-free Monday thing. Not eating meat on one day, but eating dairy and eggs on that day. In fact, dairy and eggs have more violence in them than flesh alone, eating flesh alone. They really do. And I invite you once again to look at that, what I'm going to post in the information section about organic dairy, and that's supposed to be the good, ethical kind of dairy, the happy animal, the happy cow dairy sort of thing. So really, what I'm trying to say is that, you know, if we truly, you know, ethical positions are ethical positions, and it doesn't matter if it's in relation. We shouldn't make these excuses just because it's about non-human animals, and therefore, and because they can't do anything about it, because they don't have anybody but us to speak for them, that we can just sort of be a flip-flop on it and just, you know, do whatever. You know, every little bit helps, and it's a journey, and all these sort of things that large animal organizations like to promote in relation to animals, all these morally inconsistent positions that cause great harm. There's still, anything less than being vegan is great violence. Anything less than being vegan is great violence. So hopefully we wouldn't promote that if we were promoting human rights issues. We wouldn't promote these morally inconsistent positions. We wouldn't say, okay, well, only hit your child on Saturday and Sunday, and the rest of the week don't do it. We wouldn't say things like that. We wouldn't say, well, let's think of humane ways of child exploitation in that particular country. Let's promote humane child slavery. Instead of abolishing that slavery, let's promote humane child slavery. Hopefully we wouldn't say things like that. And hopefully you don't see human rights groups promoting humane sorts of slavery or humane kinds of abuse. And yes, there are some things that are ubiquitous. There are some things that are ubiquitous in society, like domestic violence is ubiquitous in society. Most people would probably say that it is wrong to, you know, to treat partners, you know, to harm and hit and often kill. Many women are killed every week all over the world due to sexism and misogyny and the domestic violence that occurs within relationships. Sorry, I've got a bit of an itchy nose. Many women are killed. It's ubiquitous in society that domestic violence is rampant, and it seems to be getting worse. Does that mean that we should go, well, okay, let's promote that, you know, rather than partners sort of only, you know, kind of strangling their partner, let's say they only kind of hit them with the front part of their hand on their head. I mean, we wouldn't suggest, you know, improvements on something that's wrong and something that stems from sexism and misogyny. We wouldn't be promoting that, hopefully. And yet, and even though it's ubiquitous, domestic violence and rape is ubiquitous in society, we hopefully would never be sort of suggesting, better, sort of like we would say, let's end this sort of behavior. Let's end, and let's address the sexism and misogyny that underlies this behavior. But oftentimes, most of the time, and this is something that's widespread in our society and in our species, we never ever address the cause of things. We always address the symptoms. Instead of governments, say, addressing domestic violence by focusing heavily, sometimes some campaigns do this, but I mean, our whole way of the whole gender stereotypes that we have to do with men and women are problematic. But in some ways in particular, even though there are still very problematic gender stereotypes that we promote in society, and unfortunately young boys continue to adopt that, and then we end up with these sort of situations we have with rampant domestic violence, huge rape the statistics for rape are outrageous in universities, etc., college campuses. So there's something very wrong with that. It's a sort of an indoctrination of sexism and misogyny in our society, which continues on these very problematic behaviors of domestic violence and rape. And that is what happens, and that's why, and what I'm trying to say here is that we shouldn't be promoting sort of all these different morally inconsistent positions in relation to non-human animals if we truly think, if we have any ethical position, we wholeheartedly reject that discrimination. That's what I'm trying to say here. So I know it benefits us to always make things about ourselves. And it benefits us to never look at and address the actual cause of things. Because that means we'd have to change our own behaviors. It's much easier to address the symptoms rather than the cause. And the cause of a lot of violence is otherizing humans and otherizing non-humans, and that's why we have the mess we're in today. And if we think that what we're doing to non-human animals is not affecting everything, and I'm talking now just about the violence that we inflict on the vulnerable, then we are mistaken, because what we've done to animals, we are doing to humans. There are lots of examples of what we've been doing to non-human animals, we are doing to humans. And that's what happens when you otherize a group. It enables you to look at them as not a sentient being, and to otherize them and to view them as an object or a thing, and then you can do whatever you like to them. And that's what we do in society. And it starts with the way we are exploiting and killing animals, because they are the most vulnerable group on the planet. It's the most invisible form of discrimination. Speciesism is the most invisible form of discrimination, and the one that's causing the tremendous violence. Every second of every day, thousands of animals every second of every day are being tortured in slaughterhouses or tortured on these happy little mom and pop farms, being killed. If we want to see what violence looks like, then go to a slaughterhouse, any slaughterhouse. The ones that are approved, and they say that the animals are killed humanely, etc. Nonsense. Just go to a slaughterhouse and spend a day there, or even spend an hour there. They're a horror house, no matter where they are. Blood and gore and animals thrashing about and screaming, and it's just absolutely horrific. And even if you go to a little mom and pop farm and somebody's standing there and holding a lamb, and even if they're stroking their head and saying nice things to the lamb and then slitting their throat and then they bleed out. Have you ever been to a blood bank and given 500 mils of blood and you feel a little bit unwell? And that's just 500 mils of blood. That's only a small amount of your blood volume. Imagine having somebody holding you and then slitting your throat and having all your blood, your whole volume of blood, bleed out, and how awful that is. How awful that it would be and how that would feel. And having people holding on to you while that happens. And that's the so-called, this is what people sort of say, but but that's humane. That's humane. That's the nice way to kill animals. They're not frightened. How would you know then? How would you feel if people were holding on to you and then slit your throat, and then you were bleeding out? I mean, you don't die instantly, and then your blood is flowing everywhere, and they're holding on to you. And this is the so-called, and this is of course rare. This is, some people will kill animals like that. So what? So what? Or the way that they're normally killed now in these huge industrialized meat processing, and I put that in quotes, meat processing plants where the slaughter lines are so fast-paced that many animals are not rendered unconscious, and that there are many animals, and they're often killed. They're often it's not uncommon for cows to have their skin stripped off them while they're alive in slaughterhouses. That's not uncommon. It's very common for chickens and pigs to be boiled alive because they're not rendered unconscious. And of course, animals know there's something wrong even before they get to, when they go down those chutes. They can feel the fear in the air. They know, and they are frightened. There's a video of an animal. There's no blood in it or anything. There's no blood in it. There's a video of an animal going down a chute toward the slaughterhouse where they're going to be slaughtered, and you can see the fear, and they know that something is wrong. And they can feel it, and they're very, very, very afraid. This is what we're doing. We're doing all of this dreadful violence to sentient beings for trivial reasons. Trivial. Because we don't need to use animal products at all. We don't need. So, sorry, I just got cut off before. So what I was saying was, we can see the dreadful, if we really look into it and we don't pretend it's not happening, if we really think about it, which we don't want to, but if we really, really think about it, we know in our hearts that what we're doing to non-human animals is wrong. We know that because the fact that we even have discussions about it in society, we know that something is wrong with it. The fact that oftentimes when I'll say to people that I'm vegan, people know what that means now to a degree, even though there's a lot of confusion put out there by people, right? But people have an idea, and they know that it has something to do with not wanting to, use animals. And the fact that they know that inside themselves, without even really hearing anything from a vegan about it, shows that we know we can perceive the sentience of other animals, and we know they're alive and that they have lives, and that we're taking that away from them and using them. People know that in their hearts. So we can't pretend like, I don't think I've ever come across one person where when I say that I'm vegan, that they kind of don't have some sort of a feeling about that or a response to that. The fact that people feel like they need to argue for continuing to participate in violence and injustice is kind of interesting in itself. Just briefly, the way I became vegan was I was looking online one day in 2005, and I don't know how this happened, but I can't remember where I saw it, but it was a description of the dairy industry. And I could not believe my eyes when I saw what went on in the dairy industry, in everyday dairy industries. I'm not talking now about, one particular, the so-called factory farms, and please look up what that really means, because today, the idea that free range is any sort of something good is just ridiculous. They're just big warehouses with animals not in cages but crammed in, and they're dying all over the place, and it's just awful, okay? And the air is thick with ammonia. So let's not sort of kid ourselves that free range, quote unquote, is anything, or barn laid or whatever, that's just a nonsense. But anyway, back to when I saw this thing about dairy, I could not believe that this was seen as okay. And the funny thing is, like, here I was, eating dairy all my life, and not sort of thinking about the animals that they produce this dairy, but they produced it for their young, and so also it was nourishment for their young, which was being taken away from them and packaged so I could use it, and their young were given some replacement feed, and then eventually they were killed at 1 or 2 days old because they were male and no use to the dairy industry. And here they are being dragged across slaughterhouse floors and sucking on the fingers of the slaughterhouse workers because they're crying for their mother, and then they're killed. I mean, male calves are killed by the millions every year in the dairy industry. That's just one little part. I mean, it's the exploitation of motherhood. It's the exploitation of the female reproductive system. It's a feminist issue as well. The dairy cows are put on, they call them rape racks, and artificially inseminated. There's all sorts of things. They suffer with enlarged udders that become inflamed. But ultimately, even the small farms, they take the male calves away from the mothers because they're no use to them. They don't want those calves drinking their mother's milk. They want that milk to be sold to you and I. So we're stealing nourishment that is meant for their calves, their mothers too. Talking about Mother's Day, their mothers too, and those mothers cry and cry and cry for those calves for days. If you've never seen a mother and a calf being separated, there are videos online that show that, and it's awful. Okay? This happens every day. There are many, many calves. Those mothers and their children are being taken away from one another, and the mother is beside themselves, and the calf is crying and is thrown onto some truck and not given any sort of nourishment or water, anything at all, while they're being transported in hot and cold weather to the slaughterhouse over 24 hours or whatever. That's the usual thing that happens. This is not irregular. It's not some sort of isolated instance of abuse. This is normalized. It's normal. This is the so-called animal welfare regulations, all of this awfulness. If you look into it at all, animal welfare is designed to make industry economically efficient. The only reason it's brought in is so that industry can continue making a profit, and it reduces worker injuries, but it has nothing to do with the animals, okay? Nothing to do with them. Slaughterhouses, anything that's implemented in slaughterhouses has nothing to do with animals and everything to do with protecting workers from injuries and making everything economically efficient. So let's remember that about the whole animal welfare nonsense. It's nothing to do with animals, because if you apply those same standards to humans, it would be considered torture. I mean, they cut off the genitalia of animals without anesthetic. They slice the beaks off chickens without anesthetic. There's all sorts of things that happen to animals in those artificial environments that are they're horrific. It's horrific. If it was applied to humans, it would be considered torture. So let's abandon the notion that there's such a thing as humane and morally acceptable ways to exploit animals and kill them. If we're not deluding ourselves and look at it face on and be honest with ourselves, we will see that that is a nonsense and it's designed to make us feel better. That's what it's designed to do. It's designed to sell happy animal products and make us feel better about it, so that we can go to sleep at night and say, oh, well, that chicken had a happy life. That chicken had a happy life, you know, and that chicken was killed humanely, so that's okay. I can do that. Oh, look, here's the 5-step humane labels from, you know, promoted by the Humane Society of the United States. See, that's fine. I can eat that flesh. I can drink those secretions. I can eat those eggs. Look, it's got the 5-step humane label. Yay! That animal was killed compassionately. Isn't that the irony of that? Killing compassionately. Where would we see that anywhere else? These large animal organizations, they are just branches of industry. Mercy for Animals, the Humane Society of the United States, PETA, they have people, they work very closely with industry and they sort of help one another. They're just big organizations, bloated organizations that promote happy animal products, and they get kickbacks from that. And they also use these single-issue campaigns to bring in donations. So let's not believe branches of animal industry when they tell us, these large animal organizations, when they tell us it's okay to eat eggs from that particular group, or that those animals were, you know, raised humanely or killed humanely, any of that nonsense. Let's not fall for that. So really, this is what I'm trying to say is, until we sort of recognize, until we see that veganism is an ethical thing, it's an ethical position just like any other ethical position, and that we need to be morally consistent and not say that one thing is okay to do, or that fetishize one animal, one species, and then, you know, focus on those species, like fetishize dolphins and whales and dogs and cats as if they're more important, more morally important than other animals. We have to sort of really think about this, you know, and let's stop fetishizing one form of animal use and saying that fur is worse than leather. We need to sort of start to be morally consistent, and we suffer from this all the time. I mean, you see it all the time, people making excuses because to face the facts are too difficult. We see this in political arenas, with green groups, you know, it's everywhere. So let's not do that. Anyway, I've covered a lot in this video, and it was really about, you know, why veganism, which is an ethical position, promoting environmental issues, like that we should go vegan for environmental issues, why that's kind of flawed in a way, and why it can also, people can just go, well, I don't need to do that anymore, but when it becomes inconvenient, and they just continue using and exploiting animals, you know, in their diet and whatever, in their clothing, etc. So it's not something that, and if it worked, we'd have a lot of people already vegan, because a lot of people already know about the environmental devastation that's caused by animal agriculture, and it hasn't made people vegan. I know lots of people who know all about that, and they're not vegan. They cut back a little bit, or maybe they only eat chicken or fish. I mean, what is that? There's lots of disaster in relation to industrialized chicken breeding, etc. Excuse me. There's lots of problems with all sorts of animal agriculture. Just the fact that they're sentient beings, and we're doing this to them because we can. A human supremacist position. And just by the way, chickens in broiler, the ones that people eat, the chickens that we eat, they grow so fast in such a short period of time that they regularly have heart attacks and their legs break. Their legs are broken. They regularly have heart attacks. That's and the air is thick with ammonia. These are broiler chickens that people eat. Okay, so just remember that. And these are in the happy, the so-called humane standards farms. Just imagine that. Being in a situation where you're growing so fast that your legs break and you have a heart attack. Anyway, so let's try and do some reading about this issue, and I invite you to look at uvearchives.wordpress.com, and I'll put a link to that. UVE Archives has great information on it about the ethical position of veganism, and howtogovegan.org, which is my vegan resource podcast. I invite you to check that out because that has a lot of great, I think is really good information. And howtogovegan.org. So check that out, and I'll put some other links, and also get a hold of a book called Mind If I Order the Cheeseburger and Other Questions People Ask Vegans by Sherry F. Cobb, Professor Sherry F. Cobb. It's a great book. It's kind of like, it's really like a frequently asked questions, and it's answered in such an eloquent way, and I invite you to check out that book. So I'll put a link to that in the information section. So anyway, I hope that I've covered some of the issues. I know I tend to meander because I just go, it's just sort of off the cuff. But I just trying to emphasize how important it is that we become vegan for the right reasons. And it doesn't matter if people say, well, but that's not going to make people go vegan, it's too challenging. Well, let's talk about the environment. But talking about human-centric reasons for stopping something is never going to take. It's never going to be a certainty. People, when it becomes inconvenient, this is just human nature. When it becomes inconvenient, if you don't have a strong internalized position about it, you're just going to abandon it. So it's not going to help. It's not beneficial. So anybody who thinks that promoting baby steps and every little bit helps, and veganism a journey, it's a personal choice, it ceases to be a personal choice when it affects and it violates the rights of other sentient beings. It ceases to be a personal choice. It ceases to be a journey. It ceases to be anything like that when it violates the rights of other sentient beings and they end up being murdered for, and what turns out to be completely unnecessary reasons, trivial reasons of palate pleasure. We are taking that sentient being's life for a few moments of palate pleasure. We're removing children from their mothers for a few moments of palate pleasure, and they are distressed and crying, and then they're killed eventually. All dairy cows end up in the same slaughterhouses as all the other cows. There's the same slaughterhouses. When they are not quote unquote productive anymore, that's what happens to dairy cows. The same slaughterhouse, the same horror houses. So let's remember that and the egg industry is a horror. They throw little male chicks into bins and they die, suffocate in bins, or they're thrown mostly alive into grinding machines. These are the male chicks, into grinding machines, because they're no benefit to the egg industry. So these are all the things that go on every second of every day when we're not vegan. Now, if we believe in violence, if we believe in non-violence and justice, particularly those of us who are against wars and who are against violence toward humans, if we say we're for non-violence and justice, then we should be vegan. If we say we are for women's rights or reproductive, if we say we are, if we say that we are against exploiting the vulnerable, then we have to be vegan. If we say that we do not want, if we say that we are against famine, if we're against, if we don't want a world that's going to be collapse under climate change, then we have to be vegan. But the most important reason to be vegan is because sentient animals don't deserve us to be exploiting them like this. They belong on the planet. They have reasons to exist that are separate from us, and they have every right to be here as we do. And whether they're domesticated or they're wild animals, they're all affected by our indoctrination, our speciesism. They're affected and they suffer and they are killed. And we see them as resources and commodities, and they're not. And they don't deserve this. So if we believe in nonviolence and justice, then justice is not exclusive. We need to go vegan and stay vegan. And we need to promote veganism for the right reasons and not pat people on the head and tell them they're doing a great job if they don't eat meat on Mondays. We have to be consistent, just like we have to be consistent with any ethical position. And there's nothing daunting and hard about it, and there's nothing extreme or purist about it. It's not purist. It's not being purist, to embrace a consistent, morally consistent ethical position. It's not being purist. It's just being morally consistent. So let's try and do that. And please visit howtogovegan.org to find out more. Thanks very much for listening to Faint Signals from Vega. I hope you will subscribe to this to YouTube at Vegan Trove. Sorry, I don't have an actual URL yet there, but you can go to it via this video, and please subscribe. And you can subscribe on Facebook to @VeganTroveExtra, and on Twitter @VeganTroveExtra. That's VEGANTROVE extra, EXTRA. Okay, well, thanks so very much for watching. And if you have any questions, please put them in the information section. And till next time, I'm Tricia Roberts, and this is Faint Signals from Vega. Bye for now.